The sun filtered softly through the large glass windows of St. Jude's Children's Hospital, casting a warm glow over the brightly decorated hallways. It was a quiet afternoon, the kind where the hum of machines mixed with the distant laughter of children playing in the therapy room. Melania Trump, dressed elegantly but modestly in a light blue suit, moved through the halls with purpose and grace. She was here as part of her Be Best initiative, a campaign that focused on the well-being of children, and her presence radiated a quiet warmth that softened even the most skeptical gazes. Accompanied by a small team of staff and hospital administrators, Melania paused frequently to greet patients and their families. Her soft-spoken nature put people at ease, and she made a point to ask about their interests, their favorite shows, or even what kind of snacks they liked. For her, these visits weren't about photo opportunities. They were about genuine connection. As she turned a corner, her eyes fell on a small figure sitting alone near the window of a pediatric ward. The little girl, no older than 8, was dressed in a hospital gown that seemed far too large for her small frame. She clutched a slightly worn stuffed bear, its button nose just starting to fray, and stared out the window with a wistful expression. Her hair, cut short due to ongoing treatments, framed her delicate face. Something about her demeanor drew Melania in. Without hesitation, Melania approached the girl, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. She knelt down beside the child, her height disappearing as she brought herself to the girl's level. "Hello," Melania said gently, her voice like a soft melody. "What's your name?" The girl turned her head, startled at first, but her expression quickly softened when she saw Melania's kind smile. "Emma," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's a beautiful name," Melania said warmly. "And who's this?" She gestured toward the stuffed bear. "This is Mr. Snuggles," Emma said, a small smile breaking through her shyness. "He helps me when I'm scared." Melania nodded, her gaze steady and full of understanding. "Mr. Snuggles seems very brave, just like you." Emma blushed slightly, but didn't reply. Encouraged by the moment, Melania asked, "What do you like to do, Emma? Do you have a favorite book or game?" "I like to draw," Emma said after a moment, clutching the bear a little tighter. "I draw pictures of places I want to go." Melania's smile deepened, her eyes briefly glancing at the crayon drawings taped to the walls. "Maybe one day, you'll visit all those places." For the first time, Emma's eyes lit up with a glimmer of hope. In that moment, a quiet connection formed between them, a bond that neither of them fully understood yet, but would soon deepen in ways neither could have imagined. The silence between them lingered for a moment, warm and unhurried. Emma shifted slightly, still clutching Mr. Snuggles, her shyness giving way to curiosity. She looked at Melania with wide, searching eyes, as though trying to decide if she could ask something important, something that had been weighing on her small shoulders for weeks. Finally, she spoke, her voice hesitant but clear. "Do you believe in God?" The words hung in the air, soft but powerful, catching even the attention of a nurse passing by. Melania blinked, slightly taken aback by the unexpected question. She glanced around the room briefly. The subtle hum of hospital life seemed to pause as if the world itself had decided to listen. Emma looked down at her bear, nervously tracing her fingers along its frayed ears. "I've been praying every night," she continued, her voice quivering slightly. "I ask God to help me get better, but sometimes I don't think He hears me." The vulnerability in Emma's words tugged at Melania's heart. For a moment, she didn't speak, choosing instead to place a hand gently over Emma's. Her touch was reassuring, grounding Emma in a moment that felt both intimate and profound. "Emma," Melania began softly, her accent wrapping warmly around the words, "that is a very important question, and I think it shows how brave you are to ask it." Emma looked up, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "But how do you know He's really there?" she whispered. "I'm scared, and I don't always feel Him." Melania's expression softened further, and she took a deep breath. "Sometimes, when we pray, it can feel like we're alone," she said gently. "But I believe God is always listening, even if we don't hear His answers right away." Emma's lip quivered. "But why doesn't He make me better?" Melania's heart ached at the question, but she didn't look away. Instead, She squeezed Emma's hand slightly. I don't know why some prayers take longer to be answered, she admitted, her voice sincere. But I do know that when I pray, it helps me feel stronger inside. It reminds me that I'm not alone, even in the hardest moments. The room felt still as Emma absorbed the words, her small face a mix of confusion and wonder. For the first time, tears slipped down her cheeks. Do you think he's listening to me? She asked, her voice barely audible. Melania leaned closer, her voice steady but filled with emotion. I believe he is, Emma, and I think your prayers are very special because they come from your beautiful heart. Emma's tears came freely now, and Melania didn't hesitate to reach out and hug her gently. The little girl leaned into the embrace, her fragile frame trembling slightly but comforted by the warmth of Melania's presence. For the first time in a long while, Emma felt a flicker of hope reignite within her. Melania sat back on the small bench beside Emma's bed, her hands folded neatly in her lap. The quiet hum of the hospital seemed to fade into the background as she glanced at the little girl, whose tear-streaked face now held an expression of tentative curiosity. When I was your age, Melania began, her voice gentle and thoughtful, I grew up in a small town in Slovenia. It was very different from here. There were no tall buildings or bright lights, just mountains, forests, and a simple, quiet life. Emma's wide eyes fixed on Melania, her stuffed bear still clutched tightly against her chest. A couple of nurses lingered nearby, pretending to tidy up but clearly drawn to the unfolding conversation. My family didn't have much, Melania continued, her tone warm with reminiscence. But we had each other, and we had our faith. My mother would always say, no matter how small our home is, it's big enough for gratitude. She taught me to pray every night before bed. It wasn't just about asking for things. It was about being thankful for what we already had. Emma tilted her head slightly. What did you pray for? She asked, her voice soft but full of wonder. Melania smiled faintly. I prayed for many things. For my family's health, for my friends, and sometimes I prayed for courage. You see, there were times when I was scared too, Emma. Life wasn't always easy, and there were moments when I didn't know what would happen next. But when I prayed, it was like having a conversation with someone who always listened, even if I couldn't see them. Emma shifted closer, her curiosity outweighing her shyness. Did it always help? She asked. Melania nodded slowly. Not always in the way I expected, but yes, it helped me feel stronger inside, even when nothing around me seemed to change. And over time, I realized that those moments of prayer were like planting little seeds of hope. They didn't always grow right away, but they were there waiting. As Melania spoke, the room grew still. Parents in nearby chairs glanced over, their expressions softening as they listened. Even the nurses, who were usually bustling about, had paused, sensing the weight of her words. Melania leaned slightly toward Emma, her gaze steady and kind. Faith isn't just about answers, Emma. It's about knowing you're not alone. And even when things feel uncertain, you can hold on to that. Emma blinked up at her, her small hands loosening slightly from their tight grip on Mr. Snuggles. For the first time, she felt the tiniest glimmer of understanding, a quiet reassurance that someone, somewhere, cared deeply for her. Melania let her words settle for a moment, the quiet room offering a sense of solace. She took a soft breath, gathering her thoughts as Emma looked at her with wide, unblinking eyes. Faith, Melania began, her tone reflective, is not always easy. There were times, even as I grew older, when I found myself questioning and wondering. But what I've learned is that faith doesn't promise a perfect life. It promises strength to face the challenges that come our way. Emma hugged her bear tighter, her small face thoughtful. Did you have hard times, too? She asked hesitantly. Melania smiled gently, a flicker of vulnerability crossing her face. Oh yes, Emma. Even as First Lady, there were many hard times. There were days when I felt misunderstood or unfairly judged. There were moments when the pressure felt overwhelming, and it seemed like the world was watching, waiting for me to stumble. The room seemed to hold its breath as Melania continued. In those moments, I turned to prayer. I would close my eyes and ask for peace, for clarity, and for the courage to continue doing what I believed was right. It didn't make the challenges disappear, but it gave me the strength to face them. Emma's brow furrowed slightly. But weren't you scared? Melania's expression softened. Yes, I was. Being scared doesn't mean you don't have faith. It means you're human. But faith is like a light, Emma. Even in the darkest times, it reminds you that you're never truly alone. And when you feel that light, even just a little, it's enough to keep going. Emma seemed to absorb these words, her gaze drifting momentarily to the window where the sun was beginning to cast a soft golden hue across the sky. Do you think God listens to everyone? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Melania reached out, gently placing her hand over Emma's. I do. Sometimes, we may not hear his voice, but I believe he listens to every prayer, every hope, every tear. And even when we don't understand his plan, he's there, walking with us. Emma nodded slowly, her small face reflecting a mixture of hope and contemplation. For the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of comfort, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone as she thought. The nurses exchanged quiet glances, and a mother sitting nearby dabbed at her eyes. It was a moment that transcended the room, touching everyone who heard it. As Emma looked up at Melania, her expression softening into the faintest smile, it was clear that the First Lady's words had left an impression, a seed of faith that would continue to grow in the little girl's heart. Emma clutched her stuffed bear tightly, her small frame trembling as she began to open up. The words came slowly at first, as if she was afraid to let them out, but Melania's kind, attentive gaze encouraged her to continue. It's really hard being here, Emma said softly, her voice quivering. I miss my friends, and I miss being home with my mom and dad. I try to be brave, but she hesitated, tears welling up in her eyes. Sometimes I get so scared. What if I don't get better? What if I stay here forever? Her words spilled out like a dam breaking, raw and unfiltered. Melania's face softened even further, her heart aching for the little girl who carried such heavy fears. She reached out and gently placed her hand over Emma's, her touch warm and steady. Emma, Melania began, her voice as tender as a lullaby. It's okay to feel scared. It's okay to cry. But I want you to know something very important. You are not alone. Even when it feels like no one understands, you are never truly alone. Emma sniffled, her wide eyes searching Melania's face for reassurance. But it feels like no one hears me, she said, her tears now spilling freely. Even when I pray, it feels like I'm just talking to myself. Melania's own eyes glistened with unshed tears. She tightened her grip on Emma's hand and leaned closer, her voice steady and filled with emotion. Emma, I believe that God hears every word you say. He hears your prayers, and he sees your bravery, even when you don't feel it. You are stronger than you know, and his love is with you always. The sincerity in Melania's voice broke through Emma's walls, and the little girl began to cry openly, her small body shaking with sobs. Melania didn't hesitate. She wrapped her arms around Emma, holding her close as if shielding her from the weight of her fears. I promise you, Melania whispered, her own tears quietly falling, you are so loved. By your family, by everyone here, and by God. And love, Emma, is the strongest thing in the world. For several moments, they stayed like that, wrapped in a tender embrace. The room was still except for the quiet sound of Emma's sobs and Melania's soothing words. Nearby staff and parents looked on, their own eyes brimming with tears, touched by the raw, human connection unfolding before them. As Emma's tears began to subside, she pulled back slightly, her face red but her expression lighter. Thank you, she whispered, her voice cracking but sincere. Melania cupped Emma's cheek gently, a tear slipping down her own face. You are so brave, Emma. Never forget that. The room was quieter now, the storm of emotions settling into a calm stillness. Emma sat back in her chair, her stuffed bear still in her lap but held a little less tightly. Melania remained by her side, her presence a steady source of comfort. Emma, Melania said softly, her tone thoughtful. Do you know what I've learned about prayer? Emma shook her head, her tear-streaked face looking up at Melania with wide-eyed curiosity. What? Prayer isn't just about asking for things, Melania explained, her voice gentle but sure. Sometimes it's about finding the strength to face each day, even when it feels hard. It's about feeling connected to something bigger than yourself. Emma tilted her head slightly, her small fingers tracing the stitching on her bear. But how does that work? She asked. What if I don't feel anything? Melania smiled faintly, as if remembering something personal. There was a time, she said, her voice softening further, when I was very scared for someone I love very much, my son Baron. He wasn't feeling well, and I didn't know what to do. I prayed every night for him, asking God to help him get better. Emma's eyes widened. What happened? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He did get better, Melania said with a smile. But in those days when I didn't know what would happen, prayer helped me stay strong for him. It reminded me that even when I felt powerless, I wasn't alone. God gave me the courage to keep going, to be the mother he needed. Emma nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. So, prayer can make you strong? She asked tentatively. Yes, Melania replied, her gaze steady. Even when it feels like you're not being heard, prayer can give you peace and strength. It's like talking to someone who loves you unconditionally. And Emma, I believe that God listens to every word you say. He sees how brave you are, even when you don't feel it. Emma sat quietly for a moment, processing Melania's words. Then, she glanced down at her bear and whispered, I'll keep praying. Maybe it will help me feel strong too. Melania reached out and touched Emma's hand gently. I know it will, she said with conviction. And remember, you don't have to pray alone. You can talk to your family, your friends, or even me. We're all here for you. Emma smiled, the first genuine smile she'd shown all day. Thank you, she said again, her voice soft but full of newfound hope. Melania smiled back, her heart swelling with admiration for the little girl's courage. You're welcome, Emma. And don't forget, you are never alone. The room, once filled with the quiet hum of machinery and the occasional shuffle of feet, now buzzed with a different energy, a kind of warmth that spread from one person to the next. Emma's heartfelt conversation with Melania had broken through the guarded silence, creating a space where vulnerability felt safe. Nearby, a mother holding her toddler shifted in her chair and spoke up hesitantly. You know, she began, her voice trembling slightly. There were nights when I sat by my son's bed, wondering if I was strong enough to get through this. I prayed, but sometimes I felt like I was talking to the walls. Melania turned toward her, her gaze full of empathy. And what helped you keep going? She asked gently. The mother smiled faintly, looking down at her child. It was the little moments, she said. A nurse's kind words, a good day when he smiled, even just the sunrise after a hard night. I realized those moments were answers too, just not the ones I expected. Across the room, a boy around Emma's age spoke up, his voice shy but resolute. I pray too, he said, clutching the edge of his hospital bed. I pray that I can play soccer again someday. My mom says God is listening, but sometimes it's hard to believe. Melania nodded, her expression thoughtful. It's okay to feel that way, she said. Sometimes faith isn't about being certain. It's about holding on, even when it's hard. And I think your prayers are very brave. The boy smiled, his confidence bolstered by her words. Parents, children, and staff alike began to share their own experiences, their voices blending together into a tapestry of hope and struggle. One father spoke about praying for patience as his child went through treatment. A teenage girl mentioned how writing in a journal helped her feel closer to God. Amid the stories, a nurse standing near the doorway couldn't help but comment. You've brought something special to this room today, she said softly, addressing Melania. I've never seen everyone so connected. It's like you've reminded us all of the strength we have, even when things feel impossible. Melania smiled warmly at the nurse. I believe that strength comes from each other, she said. When we share our stories, we remind one another that we're not alone. The room felt lighter, as though the burdens everyone carried had been momentarily eased. In that moment, It wasn't just about faith. It was about the power of human connection and the hope that could ripple outward from even the smallest act of kindness. As the stories quieted and the room returned to a comfortable calm, Melania turned back to Emma. The little girl's face was brighter now, her smile soft but genuine as she looked at the people around her. Melania reached up to her neck, her fingers gently clasping the delicate gold cross that hung there. She paused for a moment, her expression thoughtful, before unclasping the chain and holding it out to Emma. "This," Melania said, her voice tender, "has always been a reminder for me. A reminder that no matter where I am or what I face, I'm never alone. I'd like you to have it." Emma's eyes widened as she looked at the necklace, her small hands hesitating before taking it. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Melania smiled, her gaze steady. "I'm very sure. I want you to keep this with you, so you'll always remember how strong you are, and that God is with you, even in the hardest moments." Emma held the cross delicately, as though it were the most precious thing she'd ever been given. Tears welled in her eyes again, but this time they were tears of gratitude and wonder. She clutched the necklace tightly, her small fingers wrapping around it as if drawing strength from the gesture. "Thank you," Emma said, her voice cracking with emotion. "I'll never forget this." Melania reached out and gently placed her hand on Emma's shoulder. "It's a gift to remind you of something you already have inside you: courage, hope, and faith." Around the room, the atmosphere grew even warmer. Parents and children watched with soft smiles, their hearts touched by the intimate exchange. Even the nurse dabbed at her eyes discreetly, overwhelmed by the simple beauty of the moment. Emma slipped the necklace over her head, the cross resting just above her heart. She held it tightly for a moment, as if anchoring herself to its promise. Her eyes met Melania's, and in that gaze was a spark of something stronger than words: hope. As Melania rose to leave, she looked back at Emma one last time, her own heart full. "Keep being brave," she said softly, "and never stop believing in yourself." Emma nodded, her hands still gripping the cross. "I won't." The small gift had done more than provide comfort. It had created a lasting connection, a reminder that even in the darkest times, kindness and faith could light the way forward. The visit had stretched longer than anyone expected, but time seemed irrelevant as Melania stood with Emma and the others. The room, once quiet and heavy with the weight of illness and worry, now carried a lightness, a warmth that radiated from the shared moments of connection. Melania glanced at the clock, realizing it was time to move on to her next commitment, but leaving felt harder than she anticipated. As she gently rose from the small chair beside Emma's bed, the little girl looked up at her with wide, glistening eyes. "Do you have to go?" Emma asked softly, her voice tinged with both gratitude and a hint of sadness. Melania knelt back down, her hands resting lightly on Emma's small shoulders. "I do," she said, her voice tender, "but I want you to remember something very important. You are never alone, Emma. Not here in this hospital, not anywhere. You have so many people who love you, and God is always with you." Emma nodded, a single tear slipping down her cheek. Then, without hesitation, she leaned forward and wrapped her arms tightly around Melania's neck. The hug was small but full of emotion, a moment that seemed to stop time. "Thank you," Emma whispered, her voice breaking. "For everything." Melania's own eyes filled with tears as she embraced the little girl. "You are so brave," she whispered back, "and I will keep you in my prayers, always." The staff and families nearby watched in quiet awe, their expressions a mixture of admiration and inspiration. The nurse who had spoken earlier wiped at her eyes, while parents exchanged soft, knowing smiles. Even those who hadn't spoken during the visit seemed touched by the grace and kindness they had witnessed. As Melania stood and began to walk toward the door, she paused to glance back one last time. Emma was still clutching the cross necklace, her small face now glowing with a sense of peace and strength. The sight filled Melania's heart with a sense of purpose. With a final wave, she exited the room, the sound of her heels soft against the polished floor. The hospital staff lined the hallway, nodding respectfully as she passed. Her presence had left an indelible mark, one that would linger long after she was gone. The motorcade pulled away from the hospital, and Melania leaned back in her seat, gazing out the tinted window as the city passed by. She was quiet, her thoughts lingering on the little girl she had just left behind. Emma's courage, her honesty, and her unwavering hope had left a deep impression on her. Melania clasped her hands in her lap, her fingers lightly brushing the spot where her cross necklace had rested earlier. Giving it to Emma felt like a small gesture, but the look on the child's face when she received it had been profound. It reminded Melania of the simple but powerful ways we can touch each other's lives. She closed her eyes for a moment, whispering a silent prayer for Emma and all the children she had met that day. God, she murmured softly, watch over her, give her strength, and let her feel your love every step of the way. Back at the hospital, Emma lay in her bed, the room quiet again except for the rhythmic beeping of machines. She held the cross necklace tightly in her hand, her fingers brushing over its smooth surface. Closing her eyes, she whispered a prayer of her own, her voice steady and filled with newfound faith. Thank you for today, she said softly, her words directed heavenward. And thank you for sending someone who made me feel brave. Please help me stay strong. For the first time in weeks, Emma's prayer didn't feel like a question or a plea. It felt like a conversation, a moment of connection that brought her a sense of peace she hadn't known in a long time. The story concluded not with grand gestures or dramatic resolutions, but with quiet, powerful moments of kindness and belief. The impact of Melania's visit rippled outward, touching not only Emma, but everyone who had witnessed it. Staff members carried the memory of her words into their work. Families felt a renewed sense of hope, and Emma held on to her small but mighty gift with unwavering faith. In the end, it was a reminder of the profound power of compassion, the enduring strength of belief, and the way even the smallest gestures can leave a lasting impact. The sun began to set over the city, casting a warm glow that seemed to echo the light left in the hearts of everyone who had been part of that unforgettable day. Want to hear more of this? Then click on the video on the right-hand side, which is even more brutal.